I think we'll just jump in already because soon it's almost Hanukkah, so we might as well start right now. And I'll start off with l'chaim. It's not an exciting l'chaim, but it's some coffee. At this hour, it works for me. I'll begin by first of all welcoming everybody to join, and of course I want to say a special thank you to Reb Reuven, who continues to encourage us to get together and learn. When I say us, I don't mean just me and him. I mean all of us on here and those who are even not on here. The idea of learning Torah, as we know, is really connecting ourselves to the highest levels possible, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which feeds into this class. So studying Torah connects us to the wisdom of God. Doing mitzvahs connects us to the will of God. Those are basically two prongs that we have in terms of connecting and elevating. So that's why it says Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. So Yeshikayach Reb Reuven for once again, I believe our second class. Hopefully, many more to come. And we decided, even though initially it was going to be a Parshat class, since tomorrow night's Hanukkah, we reserve the right. We spoke to the board. We have the flexibility amongst the spiritual, guidance to switch when we need to. And sure enough, right now we have Hanukkah, so like less than 24 hours. So I think it's a great topic, and the format will be similar to last time, where we each address a different topic, and we'll both weigh in on that. And hopefully afterwards, everybody can stick around and open up for questions across the board. So the topic that I'm going to dedicate myself is more about the light, the menorah specifically. This symbolic expression of this Yom Tov, of this Hanukkah. And Reb Reuven is going to talk more about the liturgy in terms of the Al Hanisim, perhaps on Eretz Halalu, and looking forward to hearing that as well. So let's jump right in. Everybody knows that the storyline of every Jewish holiday is the same, right? You all heard this one before. There was a bunch, the Jews were fine, they were minding their own business, came the anti-Semites, started making them crazy, and they wanted to start to kill them. Then God created a miracle, and they were saved, let's eat, right? That's the way every holiday, Purim, Pesach, Hanukkah, you name it, that's the story of our people. Here it goes. But while that is true, and there's no denying that one, we know that there's certainly a lot more to it. And every holiday has a unique expression, a unique energy that we are gifted, and that's why we are given this specific holiday, and that's why we address this holiday every year again and again. So for example, Pesach, Passover, is the idea of freedom. It's not just a physical idea that we left Egypt, so commemorate that 3,000 years ago that Pharaoh let us go, but no, that we have the freedom today to express ourselves any way we want. We are free. We can never be a slave again. I'll share a story later about that. In other words, it can be tied down, but our will and wisdom and how we think and how we want to elevate our mind and our soul, no one can take from us, no matter what. Sukkot represents the idea of unity, the idea of being embraced, the idea of being sheltered. And on Purim is already representing the idea of our uniqueness as a people. Haman didn't like the fact that we were still doing our own thing, even though we were spread out. So to maintain this uniqueness, we have Purim, and that's celebrated by being kind to each other and different mitzvos that we institute. Comes Hanukkah, it's very, very different. Because also, the main miracle of Hanukkah, the fact that we're all here today on a Zoom call, is the fact that the Chashmonaim, the brave fighters, were able to be the few against the many and the weak against the mighty. And ultimately, they were able to defeat the Greeks, and ultimately here we are. And yet that's not when we celebrate the holiday. We don't commemorate at that time. It's commemorated sometime after that. I don't know if it's a week, maybe a few more days, until they go back into the temple, and they want to reestablish and thank God for being alive. And they look for the jug of oil, and you all know the story, and they can only find a jug of oil that is signed by the seal, that's holy in perfection, that can only last for 1 day and last for 8 days. And after that, then they establish this is Hanukkah, let's celebrate Hanukkah. So there's a couple questions. Why wait for the second seeming ancillary miracle? I mean, let's think about this for a second. In your own mind, and you don't have to answer this out loud, but what's a greater miracle? That one candle should last for 8 days, or a jug of oil that should have lasted 1 day lasts for 8 days, or all the Jewish people are saved? Like, which one's more important to you? I know which one's more important to me. If you went to Vegas, this is before COVID, I'm sure David Copperfield can figure out how to make one candle that lasts for 1 day should last for 8 days. It could be a neat magic trick, or maybe deeper than that. But compared to the other one, so yet why do we wait for this to establish it? And what's, of course, to learn from that? And you can go further deeper into think about the menorah. In other words, today it's established the menorah is the symbol of Hanukkah. The same way matzah is the symbol of Passover, and shofar is the symbol of Rosh Hashanah, and Hamantash and Megillah is the symbol of Purim. So maybe we should have had a shield or a sword. I don't think politically correctness was the reason why we didn't have that. Obviously, it has to be more reason than that. And it's so much so the menorah that even on the U.S. stamp today, you have menorahs, and you have menorahs everywhere. And it's socially acceptable. And even on Walgreens and CVS, where 98% of maybe not in Brookline, but 98% of the people, not necessarily in the world, in the United States, are not Jewish, but there's menorahs on the outside, and everyone seems to embrace this idea of the menorah and what it's about. So how did this come to be and why? Well, this is such a great question that it was asked over 2,000 years ago in the Talmud, in Masechta Shabbat 21b. They said, "My Hanukkah." They opened up, what's the question? Is why do we have Hanukkah? And when they answer this, they take a good 7, 8, 9, 10 lines, and all it talks about is the Jews came into the temple, they looked for the oil, they found one jug, it was supposed to last for 1 day, lasted for 8 days. Doesn't mention a word about the military victory, which is seemingly, as we discussed, should be the main one. So again, we need to find out what is this about this menorah and this light that seems to surpass what seems to be on the face, much more obvious miracle, the existence of our lives. Furthermore, as I'm sure we're going to get to hear soon from Reb Reuven in terms of the Alanism, there's almost a switch. Once we come to the liturgy and we talk about in our Shemona Esrei or in our benching, it doesn't really mention much about the light anymore. Now we go against, well, now we're specifically talking about this physical victory that we have, the few against the many, the weak against the mighty. And so in the Gemara, when it talks about the miracle, it doesn't mention the military victory. When we talk about the military victory, we don't talk too much about the oil. We seem to want to separate this physical and spiritual dynamic that takes place in this one holiday. Why? Why? So to begin to understand this answer, we have to appreciate a little bit of the challenge that took place at the time of the Greeks and why this joke that I made about every holiday being similar, where there's anti-Semites, they want to kill us, God save us. What's different about Hanukkah? Very, very strange, actually, when you think about it. In most holidays that we know of, and most miracles that we know of, usually it's a classic case of anti-Semitism. They didn't like the Jews. No one can explain why they don't like the Jews. Of course, it's irrational, as we know. It's a deep-rooted hate. And they don't understand. They haven't got to know their neighbor, and that's it. That's where it is. They hate the Jews. It's not the first time. So ultimately, when we talk about Hanukkah, what makes it different is the Greeks actually didn't hate the Jews. They were very happy to be friendly neighbors. They welcomed and embraced their culture and didn't mind them actually practicing their culture. They had one problem. God. That's it. The 3-letter word. If it wasn't for God, they'd be perfectly fine with the Jewish tradition and culture. What is it about this godliness that the Jews have to also attach in their experience? It was the fact that it was their Torah or chukim, the type of mitzvahs that require beyond rationale, bris milah, certain sort of mitzvahs that we have that's beyond rationale. This they couldn't wrap their hand around. They can accept bagels, lox, and cream cheese, no problem. But the idea that there should be, that you actually believe in something, that there's actually a connection from every mitzvah that you do, that you connect yourself to a deity higher, that they didn't like. That they couldn't understand because they're rationalists and they couldn't. And so that was the beginning of trying to impede their Hellenistic ways within the Jewish people, to chip away slowly but surely and assimilate, and try to assimilate them. And that was divided. And we know many people sadly did go ahead and cross over. And so this is different than Purim. Haman was a classical anti-Semite. He just wanted to kill Jews, like most of the times that we're dealing with. Pharaoh had maybe other reasons. He wanted to have cheap labor. Over here was an ideological, spiritual fight, a very serious divide between these two different cultures. And for this, they went to fight, they went to war. And perhaps now we can understand a little bit the symbol of the light. of why the menorah ultimately becomes the one symbol of the holiday that eclipses even the latkes. It's enjoyable, it's a custom, it's not a mitzvah. But what is it about light? So let's talk about light for a second. There's something unique about light. Light is the most spiritual thing that we have in this world, but it's still physical. It's light. You can see light. If you're in a room, let's not do this right now, and you shut the light, you can't see each other. You put on the light, you see each other. So obviously it's a physical component to the light, but you can't grab light and put it in your pocket. It doesn't quite work that way. So light has this duality of having this physical and spiritual experience. As a matter of fact, the Kabbalists refer to God as the Or Ein Sof, the endless light. So light in Torah is very, very prominent, is very, very big. There's also something called Ner. This is a very important one, classic verse from Mishle, and it's brought about often in Hasidic terminology. It's Ner Havaya Nishmat Adam. When we refer to our own personal soul, we refer to it as the light. It's a part of the greater light. God is the Or Ein Sof, the endless light, and we carry a piece of that light inside of us, otherwise known as a neshama, a soul. And so it says, Ner Havaya Nishmat Adam. The candle of God is the soul of man. What does that mean? That means as we express and as we identify and we share our own light, our own soul, this, so to speak, gives light to God. He can see the world in a greater perspective, and we have influence in that, and we have the ability to do that. By the way, the common expression of that is Tikkun Olam B'Malchut Shaddai. But most people think of that as only in terms of cultural or experiential or maybe environmental. But Tikkun Olam is to really heal the world, and how? B'Malchut Shaddai, with the glory of Hashem. And each person can do that starting from themselves, and has to start from themselves. You don't start from somebody else. You start from yourself. And understanding this idea of light, and this was the real war, this was the real rub in terms of what is the fight, what is the challenges. Can we maintain this light that connects us to something higher? Well, the Greeks had an issue with that. And the Jews obviously wanted to somehow maintain that. They weren't ready to give that up. It could have been very easy. They could have lived a better life. They wouldn't have fought. They wouldn't have lost lives, but they couldn't. And so therefore, even after the military victory that they were saved, what they do, they ran to the temple to go ahead and find light and light the menorah. And because they were committed and they were stubborn, stiff-necked people, to find the oil, and they only found one oil, which is what we call Nes B'Teva, Nes Melubish B'Teva. Perhaps there's another class devoted to this, but the idea that there's a miracle enclosed in nature. In other words, is it a miracle that they found the jug of oil? Maybe, but it's a miracle that could happen. But that the oil should last for 1 day, can last for 8 days, that's a miracle that's beyond nature. So we have this commitment to go back into the temple and find the oil and light the oil. And because of this sort of inner calling to find the oil and light the oil, we are blessed to go ahead and see this oil and light extend itself even beyond what would be the rational expression of that time, or the amount of oil. And perhaps now this also explains a little bit more, I'll speak for myself, the obsession with Chabad and lighting menorahs. I mean, we have an obsession with every kind of mitzvah, tefillin and this, that, but with the menorah, it's really a big deal. And as a matter of fact, I just got my menorah out of my garage. It's going to go in my car tomorrow. If you see it, you can honk and wave. And menorah, we know that in the Gemara talks about when do you light the menorah? When it gets dark. And where do we light the menorah? By the window, to give light to the outside. And this is truly symbolic of all of parts of Judaism, but the menorah has its highest expression. You know, Shabbos candles, of course, is a beautiful light, but that's more dedicated for internal, for our own home. We light Shabbos candles for Shalom Bayit. The focus of Shabbos candles is more inside the house. The focus of the menorah light is really for outside, is to bring godliness into the world, starting from ourselves. In other words, it has to be from your house. You can't have just a menorah completely outside. It starts from within and to shine outside. So this idea that really we must start first from ourselves to find our own light. And once we're able to establish that, then we can really, really fan that out and go into the outside light. and to go give it out. Now, I want to share a couple quick anecdotal stories, and then we'll go with the conclusion about this light that we're talking about. Some 2,000 years later, that exists in 2020. The light that still exists within our own hearts and souls, and the light that exists within our families. So I had a debate with one of the young adults that come here in terms of this idea of the soul and its existence and its light, and the need to find it and the need to fan it. And I told him about a story that I heard from an event called Burning Man. I don't know if you guys have heard of this Burning Man. Burning Man it's a wild party. It takes place in Nevada somewhere, completely desert area. There's, I don't know, 100,000 people, a couple 100,000 people. And it's out there. It's, off the grid, both in terms of its literal sense and its, experiential sense. Okay. And everyone goes there to express themselves any way they want. And there's a lot of art there and other mishigas, and everything goes, as they say. Think of it like a Woodstock, on steroids, okay? Now, one thing takes place. It's 7 days. On Friday night, I found out, I wasn't there, it was on my bucket list, which I may or may not make it to, but on Friday night, there was a tent there, and there was a Friday night Shabbat service and dinner in Burning Man, Nevada. Now let's understand this. This wasn't a Hasidic group from New York that went to Burning Man. The people who went to Burning Man, our brothers and sisters who were there, were obviously seekers, searchers, artists, interesting people, but not religious. And 700 came together on a Friday night. To what? To experience Shabbos, to experience godliness. Now think about that. The whole Burning Man is a counterculture experience. It's a counterculture revolution. What is the greatest counterculture to counterculture? Expressing your own light, sharing your own light. This is what took place in Burning Man. 700 people felt the need. Now, just to double check this, I was curious that maybe other religions also do this. No, there's no Sunday service for the Islamic renegades, rebels that are in Burning Man. And there's no Friday one for Islamic, and there's no Sunday for the Christian, lapsed Christians that also want to have some sort of experience in their own culture and tradition. But to the Jew, they cannot get rid of their own light. And they have to, once again, fight for it. They have to, even at the end of the destruction or the war of the Greeks, they still feel compelled to look for another jug of oil. Think about it. They could have easily have said, let's wait till next year. We just finished a war. We lost people. We lost righteous people in this war. Let's clean up the mess. Let's get back together. Let's regroup. And next year, no, they found it within themselves, within their own light, so to speak, to look for more light. This is the miracle of Hanukkah. This is why we celebrate it. This is why we specifically celebrate it with menorah. This is why we use the most physical / spiritual expression, unlike matzah or potato, or other hamantashen that symbolizes Hanukkah. And then we'll conclude, as I promised, that this also answers the question of why we don't have the story within the Gemara, why it doesn't mention the military victory, and why in the Al-Hanisim it doesn't mention the oil. Because if we're going to mention the oil in the Al-Hanisim compared to the military victory, it would be almost shadowed by this power of the victory or the miracle of the oil, reflective and representative of our own desire to go ahead and connect. So that's why I said that it's not put in there. But obviously, they're both important. They're both critical, but next to each other, we may lose the importance. And that's why it left it out in order to highlight the military victory, because that's important too. So let us conclude, as we're less than 24 hours to Hanukkah, that may this Hanukkah be a time that we all find within ourselves the light, not be scared to fan it, not be scared to express it, not be scared to share it. And once we figure out how to do it for ourselves, and even if you don't do it perfectly for yourselves, as long as you do it a little bit enough for yourself, you can still start to share it with others. This is a tough act in terms of having a spiritual expression overshadow our physical experience. And maybe only the righteous tzaddikim, when they walk down the street, you see a spiritual entity walking as opposed to a physical. But at least for a moment, allow yourself to stare at the Hanukkah lights tomorrow night and allow that consciousness of the light, the spiritual experience of light, overshadow the own physical experience. And perhaps we'll have a taste of it, an ideal to look forward to and to look up to, that ultimately will resonate through us, not just throughout Hanukkah, but throughout the rest of the year. So I'll conclude wishing everybody a happy and enlightening Hanukkah. Okay. L'chaim.
Okay, thank you, Mayshe, for giving us both perspectives, the military and the miracle of the oil. As you mentioned, the miracle of the oil is emphasized in the Talmud. The Rambam emphasizes the military. And there's also a debate on how we celebrate the miracle of the oil. And that's a great debate between the school of Shammai and the school of Hillel. It's a remarkable debate. According to Shammai, if you start with 8 candles, you go down to 1. According to Hillel, you start with 1 and go up to 8. Now, what's at stake here? According to Shammai, how do you create a ritual? How do we commemorate what happened? We commemorate what happened by reenacting what they did. Just like the oil went down a little every day, so the candles, or really the lanterns, where they're called lanterns near in antiquity, started with 8 and go down to 1. In other words, as they did, so we did. As they ate matzah, so we ate matzah. So what does it mean to do a mitzvah? To reenact the original thing. And by reenacting the original, you make it there. Okay. So why did Hillel deviate from this obvious process of going to 8 to 1? He went from 1 to 8. His explanation was, Malim b'kodesh vein moridim. When it comes to sanctified objects, we always enhance. We don't decrease. But what is his theory of creating a ritual? He says we don't reenact what happened. We reenact our response to what happened. So the first day we light 1 candle because there was no wonder. We expected it. But every day our wonder grew. And since our wonder grew, we have to what? Every day add another light. And it kept growing and growing and growing for 8 days. So it's really fascinating because you have 2 theories here of how to create a ritual. Beit Shammai says you do it as they did. And the model is eating matzah on Passover. And Beit Hillel says, no, there's an alternative. And that is you reenact the wonder that people experienced. And since the wonder grew every day, the amount of light grows every day. In that sense, these 2 things complement each other. Now, as Mayshe mentioned, it's quite remarkable that in the prayer on the Amidah, which commemorates Hanukkah, there is little mention of the lights. And it starts off, in fact, I think we have a text that we can actually show it. Is it possible?
I'm going to try to show it. Let's see.
Okay. You guys want to look at the text because we say it.
Can you see the
text?
Can you see the
we
text?
say in the Amidah. Well, it's very important to understand it.
No.
If you don't have it, you may have access to a Siddur. Or if you're online, you can go to Sefaria, Sefara, and then click on their liturgy. Click on their the daily service, Shacharit. Then click on Amidah, and you come to this. But if you don't have a Siddur in your hand, I'll read parts of it out loud. The beginning part.
I apologize, Reuven. I haven't figured this part out. I thought I had it, but turns out I don't.
Well, we'll try to shed light on it in a different way.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Now, the beginning of it is just like it is on Purim. It says Al HaNisim, which on the miracles, Al HaPurkan on the salvation, Al HaGvurot on acts of might, Al HaTushuot, acts of salvation, Al HaMilchamot, and on wars. Clearly, this is talking about Hanukkah more than Purim. First place, the Nisim, the obvious miracle, and the conclusion with Milchamot, wars. And then it got adopted to Purim. So for Purim, we discussed the Purim one. But since this is Hanukkah, let's discuss the Hanukkah one. It goes on to say, Shasita Lavotenu Bayamim Ahim, that you did to our ancestors in those days. And then it adds, Bizman or Bazman Hazeh. Those last 2 words are not clear. Does it mean at this time, meaning in those days at this time? And what is this time? The 25th of Kislev. And just like the wonders took place on the 25th Kislev in those days, we commemorate it on the 25th of Kislev in our day. Or does it mean the miracles by Yomim Haim Bisman Hazeh, the miracles which took place then and also take place now? Do we only commemorate miracles of the past, or do the wonders of the past open our eyes to the wonders of the present? And therefore, commemorating the miracle of Hanukkah, it sensitizes us to the miracles which are with us every day. As it says in the Modim prayer which precedes this, Al Nisecha, Va'al Niflotecha, Shebachol Yom Imanu, on the wonders which are constantly grabbing at our lives. Since a wonder took place in the past, we become more sensitive to the wonders taking place in the present. So I say the Hebrew is amenable to two translations. One is in those days at this time, because we do the 25th of Kislev, or it could be in those days and at this time, which means we commemorate the miracles of the past in order to open our eyes to the miracles of the present. Part of the religious life is the ability to sensitize yourself to the wonders which are constantly surrounding you. In fact, the Modim prayer which precedes this emphasizes the daily wonders. You get up in the morning, you say Modani. If you didn't get up, you probably would not say Modani. It's quite a wonder. You talk about resurrection, even before the first cup of coffee. If that isn't wonder and miracles, I don't know what is. Then it goes on the prayer and says, Mimetei Nityahu ben Yochanan. The hero of our story is Matityahu. Matityahu means the gift of God. Matat, ya, God's gift. There are other Hebrew names like this, like Yochanan, God gave, right? Or God graced you. Yonatan, even the word Natan. We have a lot of words for gift of God. Even the name Todos Arophe is Theodorus. Theo, God, Doron, gift, the gift of God. So there are a lot of Hebrew names which incorporate the idea of being a gift of God. And this is the day of Matityahu ben Yochanan, Kohen, Gadol, Chashmoni Uvanav. If the story goes, him and his 5 sons. Now, the remarkable thing about this is, in those days, there were 3 groups. One group is called Hellenizers. These were Jews who wanted to appear as Greeks and wanted to remove all signs of their Jewishness. According to the book of Maccabees, there were Jewish men who went to the gymnasium and tried to remove the act or the fact of their being circumcised. Must have been quite an operation. They didn't want to be perceived as Jewish at all. And they changed their names to such an extent, the high priest was called Menelaus. There's another one called Onias, another one called Jason. All these are Greek names. They wanted to assimilate into Greek culture. And the people they disliked most were those Jews who remained traditional in the ways of the Torah. So there are 2 arguments on what the Hanukkah war was about. Some people say it was the Greeks versus the Jews. The others people say it really was a civil war among Jews, among assimilationists and traditionalists. And the Greeks intervened on the side of the assimilationists. And the assimilationists were high, wealthy, urban cultural people. And they conquered Jerusalem. They took over the temple. So that Matityahu, who was a Kohen, had to flee Jerusalem and go to Modim. And to this day, many Jews flee Jerusalem and go to Modim. It was about halfway between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Remarkable. And when they get there, they must say Modim anachnu lach, I'm sure. In any case, the 2 crimes brought about them is lashkicham toratecha v'maviram michukei retzonecha, to make them forget your Torah and to make them transgress your laws. Now that expression comes straight out of the book of Maccabees. But what about Maccabees 1, chapter 1, verse 48 says, the aim of the war was to cause the Jews to forget the Torah. And Greek soldiers were sent to Jewish homes. And if they found a Torah in it, they killed the person. Indeed, they wrapped them up in the Torah and burned them. Now, why would Greeks care where the Jews observe the Torah? We don't find any ancient empire being religiously intolerant. Religious intolerance is primarily a Jewish creation. In other words, if you're polytheistic, we just add gods. You believe in 10 gods, you believe in 11, let's get together, we got 21. Blackjack, What could you have better? But among Jews, by adding, you're detracting, because there's only one. If you had a second, it's a false god. We're the only people who use the expression a false god. All other religions said, let's have more. The more, the merrier. In fact, when the Romans put the Jewish God in the Roman pantheon, they thought it was a compliment. We thought it was an insult. But they put us with the other gods. After all, they said, we made you close to Jupiter. How could you do any better than that? So we are the source of religious intolerance because we believe that one, and if you add to one, you don't add, you detract. So why would anybody try then to forget? So according to many historians, these were not the Greeks motivated. This was Jewish motivated. The more the Jew assimilated in antiquity, the more he felt uncomfortable with Jews that did not assimilate. And Jews in those days, it says in the book of Maccabees, believed that the source of Jewish suffering is Jewish distinctiveness. So therefore, if you remove Jewish distinctiveness, you will remove the source of Jewish suffering. And that was their ideology. If we are like Kachol HaGoyim, like all the nations of the world, they won't hate us. Why do they hate us? Because we're different. How do you solve the problem of hatred of Jews? Remove the difference. Therefore, what do they do? Lashkicham Toratecha. It was the Jews, not the Greeks. The Greeks were interested in the political thing. The religious thing was a specifically Jewish thing. And the Greeks were not embarrassed by Jewish distinctiveness. Only Jews who wanted to assimilate and even remove the mark of circumcision, they were embarrassed by Jewish distinctiveness. So when they joined the Greeks, what do? They fought specifically those Jews who were distinctive, and that almost lost the war. According to the book of Maccabees, the Hasidim, that was a pietistic group at the time of the Maccabees, refused to fight on the Sabbath. Fine. So when did the Greeks attack them? On the Sabbath. But how did the Greeks know that the Jews don't defend themselves on the Sabbath? They could only find out from what? Their fellow Jew. So this fellow Jew would tell the Greek leaders and commanders what made Jews vulnerable. And when Mattathias saw that, so in the book of Maccabees, over 1,000 Jews were slaughtered on one day on the Sabbath, he says, if we keep this up, we're all dead. And then according to the book of Maccabees, he issued a ruling. And the ruling was, you're not allowed to initiate fighting on the Sabbath, but you are allowed to defend yourself on the Sabbath. And by doing so, he diminished Jewish vulnerability. And according to the book of Maccabees, many of the Hasidim, the pietists, joined him in such large numbers. Ultimately, they were able to kick the Greeks out of Jerusalem and out of the land of Israel, retake the temple, and dedicate it. So that's why the line says, quoting what Mayshe said before, Masarta giborim b'yad chalashim, you handed over the powerful into the hands of the weak, Rabim b'yad matim, the many in the hands of the few, Tameim b'yad torim, the impure into the hands of the pure, Rashaim b'yad tzadikim, and the wicked in the hands of the righteous. And watch its rhyme. It's the power of the rhyming. Masarta giborim b'yad chalashim, Rabim b'yad matim, Tameim b'yad torim, Rashaim b'yad tzadikim. That's 4. But the Hanukkah's prayer revolves on the number 5. So look what number 5 is. V'zeidim b'yad oskei toratecha. Now what is zaidim? The word zaidim is first applied to Pharaoh. A zadon is a person who perpetrates evil, but he does it on purpose. He is purposely evil. The government was called Malchut Zadon, a tyrannical government, a government which enjoys in the doing of evil. And who are they handed over to? Oskei Toratecha. Since all these phrases are opposites, then normally you should say, V'zeidim b'yad what? Yehudim, the Jews. That's what you'd expect, right? Goyim versus Jews. But here, it's not Goyim versus Jews, it's X versus observant Jews. Oskei Toratecha. So the only way of understanding the word Zaidim is who has to be those Jews who were not Oskei Toratecha. And they were the Zaidim. They were the perpetrators of the specific intolerance of the Jewish religion. They are called Zaidim, the tyrannical ones. And what are the Jews who are loyal called? oskei Toratecha. And we have evidence of that because according to the book of Maccabees, when they found a Torah in a person's house, apparently he was studying it, they would burn him along with it. And when they found children who were circumcised, they hung them on their mother's breasts and killed them. Reminds you of Khmelnytsky and the Nazis. But it's told in the book of Maccabees. Where did such horrors come from? Was it only the Greeks? Or some of it was internally developed? Quite remarkable. Then the last line goes on to say, Asita Shem Gadol V'Kadosh Balamecha. Vasita, and you made, Shem, name, Gadol V'Kadosh Balamecha. Now, where do you know that expression from? Almost everybody knows that expression by heart. That is the association of the word Gadol, great, Kadosh, holy, Balamecha, in your world, begin with the word Shem. You all know it by heart. If I formulate it the following way, Yit Gadal, Gadol, Yit Kadash, Kadosh, Shemei, Rabbah, great name, Be'alma, in the world. The exact same words, which begin the Kaddish in Aramaic, are here formulated in the Hebrew. Now, what does it mean to make God's name great? But according to Yechezkiel the prophet, when Jews are exiled and nobody helps them out, people think that God is impotent. Therefore, the exile of the Jew is a Chilul Hashem, brings about a desecration of God's name, because people say, if God really cared about his people, he would help them out. Since he doesn't help them out, that's evidence either he doesn't care, or if he cares, he can't do anything about it. Both of them, right, are charges, right, unworthy of God. But when God redeems the Jewish people and they are gathered from the exile, then people say God is back in history. So God's name is sanctified and made great. So Yechezkiel uses the phrase Yitgadal v'Yitkadash, meaning God's name becomes great and holy through the redemption of Israel. So therefore the Hanukkah prayer says, by salvaging the Jews and saving them from the Greeks and the assimilating Jews, what did you do? You made your name great and holy. Because the only reason they attacked the Jews to begin with, they said God doesn't care. Or if God cares, he can't do anything about it. And therefore we can do what? As we please. And therefore he brought to his people Shem Gadol. Then we end with the last part of the prayer, which correlates with what Mayshe said about the significance of the war versus significance of the candles. But watch how it's formulated. It's beautifully hints at both, even though it does not really embrace either. It says, Achar kach bo banecha, your children came to 5 things. First, the vir beitecha, that's a sanctuary. Ufeinu et echalecha, and they cleaned it out. V'tiru mikdashecha, and they re-sanctified it or purified it. V'idliku nerot chatzrot kachecha, and they lit the candles or the lanterns in your courtyards. So there we have the word nerot. They lit the nerot in your courtyards. Then it says, and they fixed these 8 days of Hanukkah. Now, if you're not careful and you didn't listen to Mayshe's talk beforehand, you would automatically think, well, you have candles, you have 8 days. Why are there 8 days? Because the candle burned for 8 days. And I have to tell you, I myself believed that for a long time, until I heard a mimer of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who corrected my understanding of this, and then I went back and saw he's right. What do you mean he's right? It says 8, and it says candles, but it does not make a cause and effect between the 8 and the candles. Therefore, anybody reading this not carefully will automatically think of the Talmud. Those who read it carefully will think of the Rambam's focus on the military victory. In the meantime, all Jews are held together. It's like the mezuzah. According to Rabbeinu Tam and Rashi, one says the mezuzah should be straight up. One be horizontal, one is vertical. What do? We put the mezuzah at a slant, in a nod to Rashi and not to Rabbeinu Tam. Why create divisions if you can create cooperation? So I think, to use the Lubavitch Rebbe's interpretation here, you allude to the candles, you mention the word 8, but you don't say the 8 is because of. Therefore, you get both interpretations, and each interpretation or each school of thought reads their own sentiments in here. V'shalom Yisrael. Now, So why is there 8 if it's not due to the candle? Very simply. In the book of Maccabees, Hanukkah is called Sukkah Shel Kislev. The Sukkah, holiday of Sukkot, which is observed in Kislev. Because if you observe Hanukkah on Kislev, it means 2 months earlier, you had no control of the temple. Therefore, you couldn't observe the dedication of the temple. And you couldn't observe what holiday? Sukkot. So what does Hanukkah come to do? Compensates for the absence of Sukkot that year. How many days is Sukkot? 8 days. How many days is Hanukkah? 8 days. Is one explanation. The second explanation is that the Chanukah Bayit, the dedication of the temple under Solomon, also took place 8 days. So the Maccabees asked the question, if the original temple was dedicated in an 8-day ceremony, and if we're going to re-inaugurate the temple called Chanukah Bayit, how long should it take? 8 days. So we have an explanation for the 8, either because of the original dedication of Solomon's temple, either because of Sukkot, either because of the miracle of the oil. And all interpretations can fit by juxtaposing the phrase Nerot and Shmoni Yamei. Either they came together, or one causes the other, and both interpretations can live together. And as long as we hold that position, we can conclude with the last line of the prayer. The purpose is L'hodot, L'halel, to praise and to thanks. And watch the words, Shimcha HaGadol. The word Shimcha HaGadol comes from the middle. It says, Shem Gadol v'Kadosh Balamecha. Therefore, the ending is what? Shimcha HaGadol. And we all know this expression from Yid Gadal, Vid Kadash, Shemei Rabbah. To which our answer is, Amen, Ken Yehi Ratzon.
Amen. Amen. Reb Reuven, first of all, Shikoach, I just two quick thoughts, if I may, and we're going to go backwards. In reading and learning the Alanissim, which you laid out over there, so one of the things that I also studied later in life, and I also didn't understand until recently, was the fact that it says Beheichal Kodshecha, in the courtyards. And in the courtyard specifically, was not really the place where the menorah as we know it. And so therefore it seems to hint in the Alanissim that Lav Dafka, in other words, we know the Alanissim was dedicated to more of the military stuff. So there's maybe a little touch, a little hint of the oil, but even that oil was not necessarily the Hanukkah oil, it was because it was not in terms of the courtyard. And that sort of kind of takes away from, or at least makes things consistent in terms of one addressing the military versus the oil. I don't know if that...
You mean because the location itself may reinforce that interpretation.
Correct.
It could be hard to know.
Yeah. Also, yeah, it's not a.
I mean, they were not observing Hanukkah; they were rededicating the temple, and the word for rededication is Hanukkah. So Chanukah Bayit, by them, it's interesting. In modern Hebrew or modern Jewish life, if you say Chanukah Bayit, people think when you put a mezuzah in your house.
Right.
But the phrase Chanukah Bayit originally was the dedication of the temple.
Right.
So by saying Chanukah Bayit for putting a mezuzah in your house, what you really are saying is by putting a mezuzah, I'm making my home into a miniature temple. It's a remarkable expression.
Yeah. So the other thing I just wanted to say also in terms of the Alanissim, and talking about the idea of the divide that exists, sadly on some level today as well, between the uniqueness of expression of our Jewishness versus perhaps toning it down. This is a tension that exists in the diaspora and in Israel and everywhere, and it exists outside of us, it exists inside of us, so that's still there. But the storyline of Hanukkah and why it's so powerfully celebrated, and it's celebrated perhaps more than any other holiday in terms of at least its recognition for sure. I mean, maybe participation amongst Jews could be higher on Passover, but recognition on Hanukkah, it's like, it's right there with its counter holiday, as we know. One of the things that's fascinating is the actual obligation to light a menorah any day of Hanukkah is not necessarily a Chanukiah as we know it. In other words, you explain Beis Shammai, Beit Hillel, but if you only have one candle and you light it on the 4th night, and you only have one candle on the 5th night, you are fulfilling the obligation. The fact that the Jews went out of their way to find oil that was not contaminated, that still had the priestly seal, that lasted for 8 days, 2,000 years later, in commemoration of that, I don't know a Jew alive, I've never met one alive, I meet a lot of Jews, as you do too, that lights a menorah only one candle on the fourth night or one candle on the fifth night. Everyone lights the menorah at the highest spiritual standard level without any compromise, without watering it down. We all have a menorah. We light the first night, one candle, the second night, two, and we go up and go up and go. So how did this come to be? This expression, even matzah, right? Someone has a shmura matzah, someone has a machine matzah, someone has a square matzah, someone has a chocolate matzah. In matzah, you have different levels, perhaps even. But when it comes to Hanukkah, everyone does menorah at the highest standard, because this is symbolic of the tension that existed then. And at that point in time, Jewish people rallied and said, you know what? We're going to do this without any sort of delusion, So I just thought that was an interesting thing that you also saw. And we see this in Lashkicham Torah Secha. The idea that it's your Torah, referring to God's Torah, is also mentioned in the Alanisim. Umechuke Ritzonecha. Chukim is also a statute, which is beyond rationale. So this brings it back to that point. Anyways, maybe we open it for questions, unless you want to share.
Let's encourage anybody to either make a comment, ask a question. Even if you're going to make a comment, we ask you to inflect your voice upward so we can interpret it as a question. And respond accordingly. Anyone have a comment, question, or some of their own perspective they'd like to share with us? Mayshe, you want to call to Sydney? Yeah. Sydney, we see
Yes,
you.
I understand that the book of Maccabee is not part of our Torah, and I'm curious as to why.
The book of Maccabees is not part of our Torah, for really Tanakh, the whole Tanakh you're talking about. It's in the Christian Bible, and the Christian Bible is based upon the Jewish Hellenistic Bible. There are two reasons that it's not in the Tanakh. One is written in Greek. And our Tanakh only has books written in Hebrew, a little bit of Aramaic. Otherwise, it would be Greek to us. And the second explanation is, according to Chazal, Ruach HaKodesh, prophecy stopped at the Persian Empire. Therefore, any book which was obviously written after the Persian Empire was not incorporated into the Tanakh, because it was not considered of the level of Ruach HaKodesh as were the other works. So the last book which gets in historically is the book of Esther. That's near the end of the Persian Empire. Once Alexander comes in 333 BCE, and the Maccabees is the revolt against the Greeks, so the Maccabees is 167 and 162, that's over 150 years after the Greek conquest of the Middle East, or the known world of the day, and therefore any book written at that time did not get in, except one called Ben Sira. Ben Sira, which Christians call Ecclesiasticus, it's found in their Bible. It is one time cited in the Talmud Dichtiv as if it was written, but once it became well known, there was written in the pre-Maccabean period, but the post-Persian period, it was not included into the Tanakh. So in a sense, we are grateful to the Catholic Church for having preserved the book of Maccabees in Greek, because now it appears in English and Hebrew, without which we may have lost them, like many other books we lost in antiquity.
Thank you.
Other questions, reflections, or comments of your own?
Yes, I have a question, please. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
Rabun is the name?
My name is Ayelet.
Mhm.
It's something that I heard years ago, and I'm missing some parts, so maybe you can contemplate on that. I heard that Antiochus and the Greeks had no interest whatsoever in Israel at all, but the Mityevnim, like you said, had a problem with the observant Jews, and they're the ones who gave the Jews to Antiochus and convinced him to actually create how should I call it? Create a meriva with the Jews. Can you contemplate on that? I heard it years ago.
Well, that's according to the school of thought. There was primarily a civil war, and they asked the Greeks to intervene. There was primarily a cultural war between two definitions of Judaism, right? Others argue that Antiochus was raised in Rome because he was a hostage because his father had lost a war to Rome in eastern Turkey, what was Asia Minor. Raised in Rome, he was impressed with their military might, and he came to the conclusion that the only way the Greeks could withstand Roman might if he would unite the armies of Syria, which were Greek, and the armies of Egypt, which were Greek, and as united force, they could withstand them. The trouble with uniting the armies of Syria and of Egypt is that Eretz Yisrael is right in between, and therefore you have to guarantee their loyalty. So therefore they say the war, he sided with those Jews who were assimilated, who are most likely to be loyal to him and stand with him in a time of war. So that his motivation was primarily political, while the motivation of the Jews was primarily religious. But rarely does any person have only a single motivation.
Okay, thank you.
You can also make comments. If you want to shed some light on by yourself, some of your own understandings, we'd love to hear.
Or we could sing Al Hanisim or something, you know.
Well, I think Marina has her hand raised. Do I see Marina?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
actually, I
One
was
more, Marina.
I was wondering that talking about Christians, they're displaying menorahs in some of the churches, and is it some special meaning or just like a piece of Bible that Christians actually it is part of their religion, our Bible also. So I've seen menorah in Christian churches, and they're wondering what does it mean for them.
Well, Christian churches even have a picture of a Jew on their wall. Some of them, hanging there. It's not unusual, right? I mean, they take one of our guys and they make him into a god. I mean, they do what every Jewish mother does with their first child. But the fact is, in the last 40, actually since Vatican II, the number of Jewish practices which have been adopted by Christians is growing. There are Christians who observe matzah on Passover. I'll tell you a story. I was checking into a hotel in New Jersey. As I checked in, I said to the person checking me in, "Happy holidays." And the woman looked at me and says, "Do you mean Christmas?" And I said, "Among others." To which she said, "Well, I don't observe Christmas." And I said, "Okay, why not?" She says, "Because it's not written in the Bible." So I had no idea who this woman was talking to. I said, "What do you mean it's not written in the Bible?" She says, "Chris, I only read what's written in the Bible, and I follow the words of Jesus." So I couldn't understand the word this woman was talking to me. And she said, "Well, Christmas is not in the Bible," which is true. It's not in the Christian Bible. Doesn't mention it at all. Therefore, she doesn't observe it. So I said, "What do you observe?" She says, "Oh, we eat unleavened bread on Passover, and we have a special structure for tabernacles." You see that? And not only that, we observe the Sabbath. I said, "What are you?" She said, "We are Christians, and we do what's ever written in the Bible. If it's not in the Bible, we don't do it. If it's in the Bible, we do it." Right? I don't know if she put on tefillin. I didn't ask her that question. But it was remarkable is, now I'll tell you one more story. 4 years ago, I was invited by the Catholics to a conference in Tiberias. There were 150 rabbis invited, 75 who were Israeli rabbis, 75 from around the world, and was paid for by a Catholic revivalist movement. And this Catholic invited the rabbis because they said they wanted to learn more about Judaism, because in order to be a true Christian, you have to imitate the life of Jesus. And therefore, the more you know about Judaism, the better Christian, which means a follower of Jesus, you will be. So on the first night of this was in Tiberias, called Beit Domo, they had a concert. And all the members of the concert were flown in from Italy. They did this beautiful concert. At the end of the concert, every member stood up and said, "Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad" in Hebrew. You can imagine the goosebumps. I just couldn't believe when I was there. Catholics yelling out what? Shema Yisrael. Where? In Tiberias, right in a place where you could see the Sea of Galilee. So what you're telling about the menorah in the last 40 to 50 years. So if you've ever been, by the way, in Jerusalem on the holiday of Sukkot, there's a march of over it goes up to 15,000 now, last count, who march from Jerusalem all the way to the Kotel, to the wall. And they do it because of the Haftorah we read on Hasukot or Zechariah, which says on the holiday of tabernacles, all people are supposed to come to Jerusalem. And if they don't, it will be held as a sin. They quote that verse in Zechariah, which is the Haftorah we read on Sukkot. And what do? They come in their thousands to Jerusalem and they take a walk to the wall. Right? Now, if Christians are doing it, can Jews be that far behind? So the spread of some Jewish practice among some Christians, which was considered a heresy up to 67 years ago, Judaizing was called a heresy. And oh, by the way, last thing, you can go on YouTube, take out a YouTube, put in Pope Francis, Sabbath, Pope Francis, Sabbath, YouTube. There's a whole YouTube where Pope Francis is talking to his Catholic audience, which may be in the billion, I don't know. And he's telling them we should learn to observe the Sabbath. And he says, like the Jews do, a day, which is, watch the language, technology free. This is the Pope, technology free, a technology free Sabbath. And he says, we should do as the Jews. You don't work, you have no anxiety, and you spend a whole day in the worship of God. And that comes from the Pope. Had he said it 100 years ago, they would have crucified him. Another second good guy who gets crucified. But that's happening throughout the realm of Christianity. And by the way, if you want to take two more things, is the Secretary of State, Pompeo, and the Vice President both believe that the President, the present President, was chosen by God because, I quote them, the favoritism he shows to the people of God. Could you imagine Christians talking that way? A Vice President and a Secretary of State. We live in a new world. Any other questions? Otherwise, Mayshe is going to teach us a song, or we're going to sing along with him.
Yeah, I got one. So,
Oh, yes.
So Yasher Koach, it seems from Al Anisim, at least in the analysis that you laid out, that there's a lot going on, right? And you know, looking at the other brachot in the Amidah, are fairly straightforward. And I don't know if you would say, no, there's more going on there, or if Al Anisim is really a point of distinction. And if that's true, then, you know, what, like, when was it written down at a different time and they decided to write it out differently? Or I guess the question is Al Anisim, you know, more, is there more going on there, and perhaps one specific piece that we're supposed to be focusing on, or is it intentionally broader, I guess would be the word?
The word broader, you mean applies to more subjects or includes historical analysis? What does the word broader here?
Yeah, well, I mean, so I guess what I'm saying is, like, if you look at the other brachot in the Amidah, it seems more pointed, and what is being focused on is more singular, right? That Hashem should heal the sick or bring the Jews together or whatever it might be. But in Al Anisim, we've got historical, we've got war, we've got 8 days, we've got the Koach, we've got different things, temple. There's more going on, at least as I'm taking away from your analysis. So is it that it was written down at a different time, that stylistically it's different? Or, why is this one just has much more going on, and it seems, at least at this point, more difficult to figure out, like, what I'm supposed to be focusing on here than the other?
I get your point very well. It's very clear. In the Talmudic discussion of the Shemona Esrei, there's no mention of Al Anisim. Al Anisim was added in the Gaonic period, and it was specifically to celebrate a specific miracle, and therefore it's highly focused. Most of the prayers in the Amidah are general. For example, we say, Smach lanu ki chatanu, forgive us for having sinned, but we don't specify the sin. We say, Rafa'enu Hashem v'nei rafei, we don't specify the healing. The general prayers in the Amidah are generalizations, expressions of gratitude toward God, or praying for something in general. Now, you can, in Rafa'enu, add a specific prayer if you know somebody who's sick. Just like you can add a specific prayer for your own livelihood in Birkat HaShanim. So those are general prayers which people can insert their private prayers. But this is a specific event which is being commemorated, in which the Jewish people were saved. So the more you detail the event and the more you underscore the wonder, the greater the expression of gratitude. So it comes in the prayer, which is Modim Anachnu Lach. We express gratitude, and one thing we express grateful to you is our history in those events which we were saved. Okay, we have any more questions, reflections? Mayshe, always get the last word in. I hope you'll also lead us in teaching a song, I hope.
I'll do my best. So the last word is that there's no final word. Is that really there's no such thing as a Jew having a last word. It can't stop. It's just not in our DNA.
Amen.
So let's never forget that, and let's take the joy and let's take the amazing teachings and insights that not just we share tonight, but the thousands that there are that we didn't get a chance to cover. Do our best to continue to ignite our own light, and most importantly, let's remember that there are many, many Jews that each and every single one of us on this call know that you think it's a given that they have a menorah or they're going to be lighting the menorah, especially now during COVID when people are alone. I know this from my own community in the young adult space, and people are alone. We have to give them a call, wish them a happy Hanukkah, and remind them to light the menorah. And of course, if they need one, you may find this shocking, but I have one in my car. I have it on my front porch. I have it under my bed. So there's no shortage of menorahs. Let's do our best to share our light with others that perhaps don't have a menorah. That's really, really, I think, the most important message of Hanukkah. 2,000 years, we're still shining our light. Here's the next 2,000 together with the final light, with the menorah in the Beit HaMikdash, with everybody united. Chag Sameach, everybody. And
Wait, Mayshe, we have an agreement. The agreement is when we ever get together, you give a niggun.
So usually the agreement.
We have to conclude the niggun, something.
Look, if we're gonna go public about our agreements, Reuven, let's go fully public. The agreement is that the song usually follows a l'chaim. So, but midweek I don't drink. But okay, so
I'll tell you what, Mayshe, you do the singing, and I'll say l'chaim to you.
Okay, done. Haneiros halalu, Haneiros halalu, Haneiros halalu, halalu, Haneiros halalu. Ano madlikin al hachuos, dadai, haneiros halalu, dadai, dadai. Ano madlikin al hachuos vial hanisim. Yal haniflois sheyasi salavoiseinu bayamim hahem bizman hazeh bayamim hahem bizman hazeh Al yedei kayanecha hagdoshim, al yedei kayanecha hagdoshim, al yedei kayanecha hagdoshim, al yedei kayanecha hagdoshim. V'chol shemaynas yemei Chanukas haneras halalu koydeshem. V'chol shemaynas yemei Chanukas haneras halalu koydeshem. V'ein lanu lirishues lihishtames bohem ehela liraisan bilvad kedei lahaydais lahallel v'shimcha hagadol lahaydais lahallel V'shimcha hagadol al nisecha v'al nifleisecha v'al yeshuasecha al nisecha v'al nifleisecha v'al yeshuasecha. Afreid Chanukah, everybody.
Afreid Chanukah. Wonderful. Chazak Baruch. Chazak Baruch.
Okay, I think we owe each other 2 l'chaims for that one. Come on.
Amen. Amen. A double amen.
Amen.
A double amen.
Hanukkah Sameach, everybody.